Please enjoy part 2 of my interview with Dr. Porges. Dr. Porges talks about trauma and blending the Safe and Sound protocol with other therapies to support state regulation. He also covers the importance of looking beyond diagnosis to look at challenges within the integrated social engagement system. I love that we have the opportunity to talk about the SSP with animals, such as dogs and horses. We also talk about SSP and research and finish up discussing some interesting discoveries for Dr. Porges since the SSP was released and his vision forward.
Polyvagal theory is all about the intervening variable, which is the physiological state and how that intervenes between the context of the world, the stimuli, and the behavioral, psychological, and physiological response we produce. So it's that intervening variable that if the physiological state changes, we process information differently and get different responses. And this includes how we process SSP.
Wow.
So we have to be really aware of the physiological state of the other.
Wow.
And as I was saying, that when the clinicians got this, some of them couldn't wait to try it on themselves. And I got a 27-page single-space letter from a psychiatrist.
You were saying, yeah.
And this was really one of the amazing letter because she had gone through it 3 times. She bought it for herself. But first of all, she used to have to take medication before she saw her first client. And so she obviously had a whole, let's say, a history. The first time it was disruptive to her. She went through it, but she was going to do it again.
Right.
And by the time she did the 3rd time, she basically went through, literally in her metaphor, went through the tube and saw the world in a different way. And she wrote back to me, and in the end of the letter, she says, now I understand why people like music. She could hear it and enjoy it. But the most telling part of her note was that she now saw humor in her daughter's antics. So she could see a different world. And so it's really, you start learning that even though people appear to be successful in the world, meaning they hold jobs, they have higher education degrees, and they're respected, that many of them have really great difficulties in living their lives. And this told me a lot.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think everything you've just been talking about just highlights more, and what I really want to achieve with this podcast is that psycho-ed is really expanding the knowledge around how to support best outcomes for the protocol.
Yeah.
It certainly is not a tool that you can have a technician's kind of hat on and just hand it out. That you need to support and be attuned with clients to sort of say, do we need to modify the implementation?
Right. Well, I think this is a learning process for all of us.
Right. Yeah.
Because, as I said, I started with autistic kids, and they were in a safe, protected environment. And then I started to see with adults, especially those with severe trauma histories, that what I thought were cues of safety were to them destabilizers. And that really, I had to now work on that intellectually and emotionally. And I realized that when you start thinking about what are the most severe traumas that people carry with them, it's violation of trust of someone who was close to them, someone with whom they felt safe. And that is the cue that's coming back to their body when they hear the mother's lullaby or hear the modulation of the sounds. The body gives up defenses, but then sends the cues that giving up defenses is really taking on vulnerabilities. And the body goes back. And basically says to them, get out of here. And that's what the therapists need to be aware of. When I initially saw this, I was so concerned because my worldview is I don't want anyone injured. I want to be helpful. And I was saying, okay, we don't deliver it to adults. But then the world of the SSP providers started to inform me about how clever and intuitive and creative they were in blending SSP with other therapies. So using it for a few minutes, with other therapies, changing people's state, using it in a psychoeducational mode where people start to understand that their body shifted states. I started to see a different brilliance of a community that I had never even thought was. I hadn't come up with all these ideas, and it changed how I thought about SSP. When I first negotiated with ILS, I wanted held to a very strict protocol. I didn't want creativity involved,
Right.
because I was more concerned that people would take something that was good and basically overuse it and fatigue the system. I was more concerned about overuse of SSP. But what I really have learned is that the provider community, and this is who we're talking to, is extraordinarily observant and sensitive to the clients and trying to work with them with SSP as a tool. And the other point is virtually all SSP providers are trained in several other treatment modalities. So they can now start seeing how this can be useful with their other treatment models.
Yes, yes. And my goal is to have episodes talking about complementary approaches.
Yeah. So we have this, I created this organization called the Traumatic Stress Research Consortium. And people who are listening can join it by sending an email to trauma@indiana.edu. But we start to, the surveys are telling us that most trauma therapists are using, on average, 8 different treatment modalities. Not using, are trained in it. 8 treatment modalities. So it's not like you do one thing. People have an array. And what was also interesting is that many of the therapists saw their work as being polyvagal informed. And so I was very, very thrilled by that. But what they meant by it was it's not a polyvagal treatment. They have a better understanding of the physiological state, the intervening variable, when they're working with their clients. So I start to see how things are working. And it's really personally very rewarding to see ideas translated into practice.
So I'm wondering if you could speak to you now, because I know, and I'm sure you probably get direct emails yourself about, I have this diagnosis or I have that diagnosis. Will the SSP help me? So, and I know you've talked in other platforms about kind of moving beyond diagnoses. And if you could maybe speak to that, so people who are listening, who are thinking, well, I've got this or that, is this going to work for me?
I think diagnosis takes us away from understanding underlying mechanisms, and that most mental health diagnoses have features manifested in what I call the integrated social engagement system, which means intonation of voice, flat face, auditory hypersensitivities, and then the vagal component of that social engagement system, which will result in either anxiety or poor vagal influence on the heart, meaning that we'll act out more anxiety, and also poor vagal regulation or communication with the enteric system, meaning that there'll be a lot of gut problems. So a lot of features that have been called comorbidities of mental health diagnoses are really signs of a social engagement system that's not working. I was trying to push this notion that we shouldn't use diagnosis, but start talking about the features that come out when the social engagement system doesn't work, which includes hypersensitivities, social withdrawal, and a variety of other things. And over the, let's say, a couple of decades when I was well funded by the National Institutes of Health, I could never get a grant on that because the NIH funding on mental health disorders is really, they wanted biomarkers or biosignatures of specific diagnoses. And I would say that these are common core features of many diagnostic issues. Recently, I wrote a paper in a newsletter for the Simons Foundation is called Spectrum, or Autism Spectrum. And I really, in that opinion piece, I say that the scientists have failed the families of autistic kids because they've focused on genetics, they focused on molecular biology, when the real issue with the parents is their way of helping regulate behavioral state. So if we think about all the diagnoses, whether you move into behavioral problems like in education, we're talking about state regulation issues. That's physiological, that's primarily an autonomic state issue, and the communication of autonomic state as it goes up and affects access to certain areas of the brain. But it's, people want signatures.
Yes.
But it's the way they conceptualize it. But if we think really, where is, in science, where's the variance? Where is the problem? The problem is state regulation. And I ask people when I give talks to say, what would the world be like if state regulation wasn't a problem?
Right. Right.
I mean, we can see this on television in terms of politics. It's all state regulation, and that state regulation leads to fear, which leads to a distorting of what I call neuroception, which means people see danger where there is no danger at all. Faulty neuroception.
Yes, yes, yes. Very interesting. So I'm definitely getting aware of our time, and we have some questions that were sent in by some practitioners. So I was hoping maybe I could ask them, and then we'll see where we go to from there. Some of them we've actually touched a little bit on. One's a good one. So there has been some confusion around the SSP and discussions referencing a new therapy device that you were developing called the acoustic vagal nerve stimulator. I know, but I'm sure there's been lots of different discussions about, is the SSP an acoustic vagal nerve stimulator? And I'm aware of the patent, but I think we need to hear it from your words to really clarify the community what is.
Okay, so let's call one SSP Classic and the other one SSP Lite. SSP Classic is what people have. And what it is, it's a neural exercise where there's great variations across the 5 days, across the 30-minute sessions of the demands on the middle ear muscles. So frequency bands are modulated all over the place, and it's work. The individual the nervous system is working. That's why you get fatigue. People are often very tired after it. It's because you're recruiting a neuroregulatory component that's not being used. But it also has some other features that were designed into it, but the effect of those features I had not initially predicted. And that is, human voice starts to disappear because the filtering is so aggressive that voice disappears, and that destabilizes people. So but when I would listen to it, it would be like, oh, they're disappearing, but now they're coming back, and now I have a smile on my face when they come back. And this was very common with lots of individuals. So we were being challenged in listening, and as it came back, our bodies went into a state of relaxation. But that's not always the case, and I had to understand that. So I redesigned the SSP to something that I call SSP Lite, which protected the frequencies of human voice, or at least the center frequency. So human voice never leaves, but there's still modulation at the edges. So it's very relaxing and comfortable to listen. It's not fatiguing. And it functions more like, I would say, a prosthesis. It's an acoustic vagal nerve stimulator that is literally a prosthesis that is supporting how the vagus would be working. So it's calming. While SSP Classic is trying to retrain the system so it can do on its own, so it can be resilient. So in one...
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But do you have a patent on SSP Classic? And do you refer to it as an acoustic vagal nerve stimulator?
The patent has in it a claim. So the whole procedures of what I'm doing include a claim that was accepted as an acoustic vagal nerve stimulator.
Right. So I am correct if in referring to the SSP based on its patent, which was accepted, as an acoustic vagal nerve stimulator.
Yeah, it's in there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also, where we'll go next, is also was accepted the use of it for non-human mammals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, that means the concept can be used, not necessarily the SSP as it stands, because the transfer function of different mammals is based upon the physics of their middle ear structures. People have tried it with dogs because the dog's acoustic acoustic world is very similar to humans. Actually, it has a broader range, but their social communication is within the same range. And there's some really interesting effects that people have reported of calming their rescue dog down. But they did a heavy dose. They played the 5 hours through the night with the dog. And then we have another person who's interested in using it with horses who were traumatized during the fires in California.
Wow.
And we haven't done that yet, but we have to redesign the frequency band. I was actually had a conversation with a record company about creating music for non-human mammals.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very
so because so many people are committed to their pets, and many of their pets have trauma histories and are hyperreactive, and this just would create a safety mode for them. And so we'll probably be working on that within a year.
So is there any possible study that might be happening around that with use of dogs? Or?
Well, I would say there will be a study. Is there a study going on now? No. See, first, we would have to, let's talk about what size dog, what breeds, and then find someone who want to do this, and then identify what outcome measures you want to use. And so you can't use surveys.
No. Definitely have to tune into behavior for that one too.
So some, as I said, one clinician took her SSP unit and connected it to a Bluetooth speakers, and then put the Bluetooth speakers with her pet, and reported some remarkable changes. But there's probably several of those out there if you kind of crowdsource the user community, but it's not a systematic study. And this is part of what we will be doing, is we are going to start creating within the ILS community the ability to collect data, at least on survey data, on let's say spectrum children on their sensory profiles, filling that out. Because we did a study in Germany using SSP, and it reduced the sensory profiles are highly significantly improved. So they're normalized after the 5-day treatment.
Great. And I know there are other clinical trials underway in Prader-Willi syndrome.
Yeah, Prader-Willi is, I actually just sent Karen another email to get some more feedback on it. And this was a parent-initiated study, and it was being run through coaches who sent the devices to the families. And the behavioral effects on the ones that I heard about were quite remarkable, including language was, speaking in sentences with more words. One child left his plate with some food on his plate, and Prader-Willi is seen as an eating disorder. So there's a lot of what we would call more integrated social engagement coming from that. And I'm also working on a project, I'm not sure, I think I mentioned it, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which I did mention, is the hypermobility one, to deal with certain symptoms, but not the symptom of the disease. So there's the possibility that, like with Prader-Willi, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, there can be many others where many of the symptoms that have been viewed as part of the disorder are actually treatable or manageable with an acoustic vagal nerve stimulator or with the SSP,
Okay.
but it's not going to change the underlying disorder. But it's as if that disorder is sending signals to the autonomic nervous system, you can't be relaxed.
Yeah.
And now we're sending, this is the notion of using it as a prosthesis, and then recruiting the system and basically informing the system that it no longer needs to protect the organism.
So with that, I think this kind of segues nicely into the next question. I'm not going to read it out word for word, but essentially sort of does relate to individuals who've been in more like a dorsal state and they're coming to more sympathetic, but then some of the cases or some of the feedback were children who have developed illnesses, some fevers after the SSP. And just sort of curious what that connection and maybe the immune system and what you think.
Well, let's start with, if you're kind of in a more shut down, immobilized state, that the next step is mobilization, which is the sympathetic one. But the part is that the reactive part may be more complicated than what people are thinking. It may be possible that the body's shut down and there's an embedded set of cues of certain types of life threat that occurred. I'm not saying it's through a trauma of someone trying to hurt them. It could be a medical procedure. It could be a hypoxic episode. And the body is just not safe to come out of it. And so it goes now into, it gets the cue of safety, it relaxes for a moment, and then goes into this. Within other models, this is viewed as, if you can mobilize, it's not a bad thing. It keeps you out of shutting down. So it all depends on the narrative that the therapist is using to kind of normalize that subject. So you start with saying that the body is immobilized, that's shutting down. And when people have histories of that, they often end up doing high-risk behaviors that keep them mobilized. So people who have high anxiety, or many of them, have had episodes where they were shut down. They can't go back there. They have to keep moving. And this may be part of that clinical history. The bit on fever is an unusual one. The part is the body is going through, for people whose systems haven't been used, so the social engagement system has been dormant. What may be happening is, as you are changing that neuroregulation to the cranial nerves regulating muscles of the face and head, it may also create an irritation or a trigger in the laryngeal and bronchial, and it may give the person symptoms of like a sore throat.
Right, yes.
And
Definitely been
again,
reported, yes.
Yeah, and this may merely be, it's like the itchy ear. Some people get itchy ears. The same thing may happen in the throat, and then they'll be coughing, and then they'll appear, and the body will get into a cycle of what appears to be a cold. So there, as the body re-engages its natural circuits, the next step is, how do we react to that? And that's all I'm really saying. And that requires a patient observant therapist to basically calm fears and say, you know, when your nervous system gets turned back on and it finds things in a different way, that lack of predictability of the body creates fear. Predictability is our nervous system's mode of safety. And so even people, what you may be getting is they may be triggering uncertainty, and uncertainty in that nervous system is fearful, and that is part of that illness.
Interesting. And I guess I like, just on some of my background, that knowing when you're in that more vigilant stress state and the different biological changes that happen, and now you move to a more ventral vagal relaxed state, that there's been an immune system that's been responding to being in a stressed state. And now you're in a more calm state. There's going to be shifts and changes in an immune system that may surface in different ways. You know, I think there's so many things still complex about the body that we don't know.
I hadn't thought about this, but what you're really saying is that if the body becomes accessible, it's downregulating immune function and may create that vulnerability of disease state, a different kind.
what
We
I
don't
was
know.
thinking,
Yeah.
Possibly that's what I was how I was kind of thinking it in my mindset of.
Yeah, but I would always see we have to be real careful, because if you have if your immune system is tightly, or let's say chronically on, you get autoimmune problems.
Right.
And so the issue is not to think of it relaxing and creating vulnerability for disease as necessarily bad. It's getting back into a more normal way in which the body works. And I think that part is really where we have to focus, that the SSP is basically trying to tell the body, be homeostatic. Go back to the way you go back to the way that you evolved to regulate your systems.
Okay, so I think we're maybe get to some of these closing questions.
Sure.
And I know you mentioned a little bit about this earlier, but like any surprising discoveries since the Safe and Sound protocol release? I know you shared that one earlier.
Well, yeah, well, to me, the discoveries are the generalizability of the SSP stimulation as a more global vagal nerve stimulator. So even though I knew this when I started to conduct the research, I still get amazed at the generalized effects of it. So where it's affecting gut problems, there's a project on irritable bowel, and where those types of things that people carry with them as debilitating disorders might be treatable with the SSP. And that, to me, if I were to have said that a few years ago, I would have said that I was overstepping. But the feedback is that this is obvious, and it's a clear understanding of the neural pathways, that this is really how it works. Cues of safety change vagal regulation of our autonomic nervous system, and that facilitates enteric nervous system function. So we're sending, not only are we sending signals of safety, we're sending signals of safety to our enteric nervous system to do what it evolved to do, digest and eliminate in a regular, systematic way, not in response to threat or challenges. And what you find in the world that we live in, the gut is responding to everything. And it means that the cues of safety are not buffering it. And that's really what I'm learning is really important. And I'm really pleased to see that's having that effect.
Yes, very interesting. I think every time I hear a different sort of presentation from you, Dr. Porges, there's something new and a new sort of little connection that I always sort of put together. And I think the one that you gave at the SSP gathering, where you really talked a lot about the connection with the cranial nerves with just oral and ingestion and thinking of eating disorders and the mental health component that really goes with that. And instead of shifting the approach that a lot of people typically take with people with eating disorders in terms of a more behavioural approach, versus now let's shift and look from a polyvagal perspective and how do we make the system safe, and do we see a shift there where ingestion and the safety of digestion all gets connected together.
Well, the interesting part is the structures involved in ingestion, or suck, swallow, breathe, and vocalize. Those early parts become the basic structures of our social engagement system. So it gives us all the clues. And Prader-Willi gives us another clue, because they have an atypical suck, swallow, breathe reflex, and they have basically the failure to thrive, and then they become overeaters, which means that circuit of suck, swallow, and breathe is inefficiently calming them down. And what we need to think about with eating disorders is a ingestive strategy to regulate state, an inefficient one, and is it a replacement for social behavior? So my suggestion, and I throw this out when I give talks, is for people to run a study of creating eating clubs for people who have eating disorders. And basically they can eat alone, but they have to have the cell phone on. They have to talk to each other, and they can eat whatever and as much as they want and let's see what happens.
Yeah.
The point is that if social engagement starts to replace ingestion, then eating disorders become cured.
Interesting. Yeah.
Well, it's
with
a
that,
hypothesis.
I think perfectly we segue into the next question in terms of, sort of consider, for people out there considering research, are there any particular areas? I mean, this could be a big conversation, but just something that jumps to mind of an area that you think you'd like to see investigated more?
Well, actually, I got an email. I was in London a couple of weeks ago, and one of the speakers had Parkinson's.
Uh-huh.
And of course, Parkinson's gets manifested in the social engagement system.
Mm-hmm.
And here was a person who was really frustrated because his voice intonation and his facial expression, they were disappearing, and he needed to make videos of his life's work. And he felt frustrated they couldn't do that.
Wow.
And so he asked me about SSP. And hypothetically, it should work. It should be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know.
Right.
I don't know.
Well, I think the interesting thing, not that I read it in depthly, but I think there's research coming out with a whole gut, where they're really researching a connection between gut dysbiosis and Parkinson's as well. So,
yeah, there's actually a study that people who had vagotomies were protected from Parkinson's, so which means the afferents of the gut were partially causal for the expression of Parkinson's, which probably means that a dysregulated gut, which is probably what most people have, is sending information up that is fostering the disease state. But since I saw what looked like loss of motor tone with Parkinson's, I thought that the SSP is functionally a neural exercise of the social engagement system. So it goes in through the ears, but the feedback loop should change the whole facial expression and intonation of voice, assuming that the disease itself is not destroying the actual neural pathways. I don't know that.
Yes, yes.
And so I'm very interested to see what happens.
Yeah.
But I would love to see, I'd love to see some, systematic research on that.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Yes. What about vision forward? What would you like to see?
Well, the vision is becoming an interesting playground, if we can use that terminology, because the providers of SSP have become very stimulated to push the envelope, to develop best practices, to develop modifications for trauma, to develop measures of effectiveness, including measures of physiological changes. So pressing forward, I would like to see more physiological monitoring, which was my history. And I'm working with Unite, who is the company now that distributes SSP, to modify one of their devices that will functionally be a polyvagal monitor that will monitor the physiological states, meaning the vagal regulation, sympathetic tone, using a simple single sensor off the earlobe or finger. And it will do this, and they'll be able to monitor, and it will be, in a sense, cost effective, under $300. And then the game plan would be, in my own mind, is the data could then be shared through the cloud, and we could do systematic evaluation of that with the therapist's help.
I think that's very exciting. I think I'm actually on the team, the practitioner contribution to helping to brainstorm about bringing all that connection together. So I'm personally very excited about that too. I think physiological measures just gives us so much more data.
Well, going back to your own training and your history, the discussion I had online with the neurofeedback people, that there are a few of them using SSP as part of their neurofeedback model. And this was a project that I actually have going on in Toronto with Michael and Linda Thompson. And it took us several years to get all the IRB approvals, and we didn't. It was, when we started, it was only coming. The stimuli were coming out of my lab, not ILS. So that tells you how long ago it was. And the game plan there was to use SSP, do the full sessions of SSP, and then go into neurofeedback and see if it reduced the number of treatments to get to the same endpoint.
Yes.
Now, I received a letter through email a couple weeks ago from an audiologist from Poland who was using this, and she had to write to me because she's seeing things that they never have seen before. They saw changes in the ability to detect speech with the 5-day treatment that could be measured in terms of numbers of decibels. It was somewhere around 9 decibel improvement in speech range. And she said that it normally takes at least 2 years to reach that with the trainings that they were doing. This was occurring in 5 days. And she wants now this to be used in all the schools in Poland.
Oh my gosh.
So again, this is not I mean, I talk about the enhancement of the transfer function to extract human speech. I'm not an audiologist, and so I don't have the same measurement tools that they have. But this to me is really where I want to improve the ability of individuals to communicate, to have social communication, which means to understand what people are saying. And this would just be remarkable. So I'm very thrilled.
And then with that, more regulated, because I can understand what people say, so I feel more engaged, so I feel more regulated.
So I just, someone you may know. Do you know Tony Corner by any chance? He's a psychiatrist from Sydney.
Okay.
He just wrote a book. He's part of Russell Mears' group of psychiatrists. He wrote a lovely book that I just read. And it's really about language as a structure in development of the concept of self. That language enables us to define who we are. And it's a beautiful book. It's very scholarly. Well, it's not out yet. I got to read it.
Oh, okay. You got huge access.
I got to read it and to make a few comments on it. It's a wonderful book. Excellent. So it's very scholarly, and I think you would enjoy it. I think you'd enjoy meeting him.
Yes. Well, talking about Sydney and neurofeedback, the STARTS organisation that provides services to refugees who experience trauma, they're actually have been running SSP and following neurofeedback because they have a big neurofeedback component to their treatment intervention.
And what kind of, are they getting good effects?
We're getting some really nice effects. In fact, we're sort of partnering them, and we're going to be running some SSP trainings with them.
Wonderful.
So they're a lovely team.
Yeah, I was there about at least 10 years ago.
Yes, they told me.
Lovely people. Yeah, and send my best to them.
Yes, I will. And I know you're making a trip out to Australia for the Australian Childhood Foundation conference in August, and then over to New Zealand as well. So at the end, we'll have some little access, some information about what that all is as well.
Wonderful. It's good. It's my first time to New Zealand.
Oh, you'll love it. It's so much smaller than Australia, and you can see so much a lot quicker than what you can here, but it's very, very scenic. Yes. And I'm hoping I'll see you there.
Oh, you're going over at the same time? Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah. So, in closing, is there anything else that maybe we haven't talked about that you think you would like to share about the Safe and Sound Protocol?
I think there's an interesting point to make, not about the protocol, but about being a scientist and what it is to feel good with one's extended career. That most of us as scientists fear the end of career.
Right.
Because without laboratories, we lose our sense of self. We lose our boundaries. And starting about 20 years ago, I started to create a model. And the model was that for me to feel a sense of fulfillment and a sense of a life well lived, I wanted my ideas to have, to basically be translated into practice. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to be helpful to humanity. And many people may want that. A few people actually have that opportunity. And this is really the feelings that I get from SSP and and the feedback I get from the emails of being helpful in the transforming many people's lives. So it enables me to feel this wonderful sense of gratitude. And I think we tend to not understand in many of our colleagues or people that we know that the goals in life are not goals of accumulating awards, money, or stuff. They're really a desire to have an impact on the positive nature of humanity, for people to optimize their lives. And when given that opportunity, there's only one thing you could do, and that is to smile and have a good sense of gratitude. And that's what SSP is doing for me at this stage of my life. It's enabling me to feel that there is this wonderful ability to take ideas and transform them into products and interventions that could help people. So it's a circularity where you have ideas, they come out to the world, and it comes back to you, and you have a smile at the end of it. That's how I feel.
I couldn't imagine, but yes, I'm sure. Just because this is reaching all around the world, and it's touching so many lives, and it's helping so many people, and it brings reward to practitioners to know that they can impact the clients they work with so significantly.
This is, these are special moments, and the issue is, it doesn't, it's not an ego journey. It's actually a journey of humility, because the humility comes from understanding what it is to be a human. And this is really, it's the validation that my insights about what it is to be a human could be translated into a technique that enables people to be more human. And it just, for me, it's a wonderful journey, it's a moment or a process of fulfillment. And I think that's all we can ever dream about or hope for in our lives. And so I thank everyone out there. And so if you ask me what are the surprises are the creativity. It's not just, I would say, the mixture of creativity, insight, and passion that the providers of SSP are bringing into the community. And I mean, basically, the interactions are interactions of love, of trying to help people and support people. And I appreciate that and have great respect for that. And so I'm both on the journey, but I'm also an observer of the journey. So it's really very, very rewarding. So thank you. One's role changes in life as you move into different positions or different roles. And one of my roles has become to witness other people, to just be there.
Well, I just want to say thank you again. I really appreciate for your time and
Well, thank you, Joanne.
Continue touching people's lives.
Well, I hope to, and I think it's energetic to be helpful to others. I think we need to understand that our biological imperative is to connect and to support each other. So thank you, Joanne, and good luck with the podcast.
Thank you.
As always, a wealth of insight and information. I hope everyone enjoyed part 2 of this interview with Dr. Porges for the Safe and Sound Protocol podcast. For information regarding training and support for Australia and New Zealand, please contact Integrated Listening Australia. For the rest of the world, contact Integrated Listening Systems based in Denver, Colorado.